When I was 13, my parents told me to man up and find my own ride home, then left me at a gas station 75 miles away. I slept behind a dumpster that night. I never spoke to them again, until last week, when I got a wedding invite from my sister, with a note from them inside. I, 32M, haven't thought about that gas station in 19 years, but the smell of diesel fuel still makes my stomach turn. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Thick, cream-colored cardstock, elegant script, my sister's name embossed in gold. I almost threw it away without opening it. Almost. But something made me slide my finger under the seal, and that's when the smaller envelope fell out. Plain white. No name on it. Just a folded piece of notebook paper inside with 2 words written in my mother's handwriting. Please come. My hands started shaking. I sat down on my kitchen floor and stayed there for 20 minutes, staring at those 2 words until they blurred together. The gas station incident happened during a family road trip when I was 13. We'd been visiting some relatives 4 states over, and on the way back, we stopped for gas about 75 miles from home. It was late afternoon, getting dark. I went inside to use the bathroom while my parents and sister waited in the car. When I came back out, wiping my hands on my jeans, the parking spot was empty. At first, I thought they'd moved to a different pump. I walked around the building, checked both sides. Nothing. Our blue sedan was gone. I went back inside and asked the clerk if he'd seen where my family went. He barely looked up from his magazine, just shrugged and said he hadn't noticed. I stood in that parking lot for 15 minutes, certain they'd realize their mistake and come back. Any second now, I kept thinking. Any second. The sun dropped lower. Cars came and went. None of them were ours. I used the payphone to call home. No answer. I tried my dad's cell. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again and again. On the 5th try, he picked up. He told me they decided I needed to learn some independence, that I was old enough to figure things out on my own, that I spent too much time being coddled and it was making me soft. When I asked him what I was supposed to do, he said I should man up and find my own way home. Then he hung up. I called back immediately. My mother answered this time. I started crying, asking her to please come back, telling her I was scared. She said my father had made his decision and she supported it, that this would be good for me in the long run, that I'd thank them someday for teaching me self-reliance. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like she was explaining why I couldn't have dessert before dinner. I had $11 in my pocket. No other phone numbers memorized except theirs. It was 1993, so no internet, no cell phone, no GPS. Just me in a gas station in the middle of nowhere as the sky turned dark. I asked the clerk if there was a bus station nearby. He said the nearest one was 8 miles down the highway. I asked if I could use the phone to call the police. He told me to stop bothering him and buy something or get out. So I left. I started walking along the highway shoulder, but after about a mile, I got scared. Cars were speeding past in the darkness, and I kept imagining someone pulling over with bad intentions. So I turned back to the gas station. At least there were lights there. People. Cameras, maybe. The clerk had changed shifts. The new guy didn't care that I was hanging around as long as I stayed outside. I sat on the curb for a while, then moved to the side of the building when it got colder. That's when I found the dumpster. The space behind it was somewhat sheltered from the wind, and there were some flattened cardboard boxes stacked nearby. I arranged them into a makeshift bed and curled up, using my jacket as a blanket. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me jump. A rat ran across my leg at one point, and I had to bite my sleeve to keep from screaming. I kept checking the parking lot, hoping to see our car pull in. It never did. Around 3 in the morning, a police cruiser pulled into the station. I stayed hidden behind the dumpster, terrified. I'd been taught to trust police, but I was also scared they'd call my parents, and my parents would be angry that I'd caused trouble, that they'd punish me worse for not following through on their lesson. So I stayed quiet and still until the officer bought his coffee and left. The sun came up. I was filthy, exhausted, and so hungry my stomach hurt. I used 6 of my $11 to buy a large water and a bag of chips from the vending machine. Then I went inside and asked the morning clerk if I could use the phone book. I looked up youth shelters, churches, anything that might help. There was a Methodist church about 3 miles away. I wrote down the address and started walking. The pastor's wife found me sitting on their front steps around 9 in the morning. I must have looked pretty rough because her whole expression changed when she saw me. She brought me inside, gave me food and water, and asked me what happened. I told her everything. She called my parents. I sat in the church office, listening to her side of the conversation. Her voice got progressively colder. She hung up and looked at me with something like horror in her eyes. Then she called Child Protective Services. The next few weeks were a blur of interviews, temporary foster placement, and legal proceedings. My parents insisted they'd done nothing wrong, that they'd been teaching me a valuable lesson about resilience and self-sufficiency. That kids these days were too soft and needed tough love. My mother cried during her interview, saying she never thought I'd involve authorities, that I'd betrayed the family by making them look bad. My sister, who was 16 at the time, gave a statement saying our parents had talked about the plan during the drive, that they'd specifically discussed leaving me at the gas station to teach me independence. She said she'd thought they were joking until they actually did it. She'd apparently argued with them in the car afterward, but they'd told her to stay out of it. CPS found other issues too. Not physical abuse, but a pattern of emotional neglect and inappropriate punishments. My father once made me stand in the backyard for 6 hours in the rain because I'd gotten a B on a math test. My mother had a habit of withholding meals as punishment for minor infractions. Small things individually, but together they painted a picture. I was placed with my aunt and uncle, my mother's younger brother and his wife. They lived 2 states away, which suited me fine. They were kind people who seemed genuinely shocked by what had happened. They took me in without hesitation and never once made me feel like a burden. My parents lost custody of me. They retained custody of my sister, who was older and didn't want to leave. The court issued a restraining order that prohibited them from contacting me without my consent. I never gave consent. I changed my last name when I turned 18. Legally cut all ties. My aunt and uncle supported the decision. They tried to maintain a relationship with my parents at first, for family harmony, but eventually gave up. My uncle told me years later that my mother blamed me for ruining their reputation in the community, that my father never acknowledged any wrongdoing. I went to college on scholarships and student loans, became a civil engineer, got married at 27, divorced at 30, no kids, which I was grateful for given how the marriage ended, built a decent life, saw a therapist on and off for years, working through trust issues and abandonment trauma, made peace with most of it, or at least learned to carry it without letting it define me. My sister and I had sporadic contact. She'd email every few years, updating me on her life. She went to college, became a teacher, got engaged. Her messages were always carefully neutral, never mentioning our parents unless I asked. I gathered she still had a relationship with them, though she kept the details vague. I never held it against her. She'd been a kid too, caught in the middle of something she didn't create. Which brought me back to the wedding invitation on my kitchen floor. I didn't respond right away. I put both envelopes in a drawer and tried to forget about them. But they sat there like a stone in my shoe, impossible to ignore. After a week, I called my sister. She sounded nervous when she answered. She asked how I was, and I told her I was fine, that congratulations were in order. She thanked me, then waited. The silence stretched out between us. I asked her about the note. She sighed and said she didn't know Mom was going to do that she'd asked our parents not to reach out to me directly, but Mom had slipped the note into the invitation anyway. She said she understood if I didn't want to come, that there would be no hard feelings, but she'd like me there if I could manage it. I asked if they would be there. She said of course they would be, they were her parents. Her voice had an edge to it, defensive. I told her I'd think about it. After we hung up, I sat with the decision for days. Part of me wanted to ignore the whole thing, to maintain the wall I'd built, and keep living my life without looking back. But another part of me, the part that had never fully healed, wanted something. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but something. I decided to go, but not for them. For me. I didn't RSVP through the formal channels. I just showed up on the wedding day, 3 hours before the ceremony. I'd done some research and found out where my parents lived now. Same state, different town. A nice suburban neighborhood with trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes. Their house was beige with white shutters. A garden gnome sat by the front door. I rang the doorbell at 2 in the afternoon. My mother answered. She looked older, grayer, with deep lines around her mouth. Her eyes widened when she saw me. She said my name like a question, like she wasn't sure I was real. I told her we needed to talk. She started to say something about the wedding, about being busy, but my father appeared behind her. He'd aged harder than she had, his face weathered and drawn. He looked at me without expression and told my mother to let me in. We sat in their living room. Floral couch, family photos on the mantle. I noticed there were no pictures of me, not even old ones from before the gas station. It was like I'd been erased. My father asked what I wanted. His tone was careful, controlled. I told him I wanted to hear him say it. He asked what I meant. I told him I wanted to hear him admit what he did was wrong. He got quiet. My mother folded her hands in her lap and stared at them. The silence went on so long, I almost got up and left. Then he spoke. He said they'd been trying to raise me right, to prepare me for a hard world. That maybe they'd gone too far that night, but their intentions had been good. He said I'd turned out fine, hadn't I? So maybe their methods worked. Something cold settled in my chest. I asked if he was seriously trying to take credit for how I turned out. I reminded him I'd raised myself, with the help of people who actually gave a damn about me. That he and Mom had contributed nothing but trauma. My mother finally looked up. She said they'd written me letters over the years that my aunt and uncle must have kept from me. That they'd tried to reach out, but I'd refused contact. She said it had broken her heart to lose me. I told her the letters probably existed, but that I'd instructed my aunt and uncle to trash anything from them without telling me. That I hadn't wanted contact then and didn't particularly want it now. That I'd come here for one reason only. My father asked what that reason was. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. I told them I wanted them to know that I remembered everything. Every detail of that night. The fear, the cold, the certainty that the people who were supposed to protect me had decided I was disposable. I wanted them to know that I'd built a good life despite them, not because of them. And I wanted them to know that I was coming to my sister's wedding, and if they had a problem with that, they could stay home. My mother started crying. Not the pretty kind of crying you see in movies, but the ugly, gasping kind. She said she was sorry, that she'd made mistakes, that she wished she could go back and change things. I asked if she'd really just apologized for making mistakes, plural, vague, like she'd forgotten to pack my lunch a few times. I asked if she understood the specific thing she was apologizing for. She didn't answer. My father told me I was being cruel, that I'd come here just to hurt them, that they were older now and didn't need this kind of stress. I stood up. I told him he was right, that I had come to hurt them, because they'd hurt me first and never once acknowledged it properly. That I'd spent 19 years carrying what they did to me, and they couldn't even give me a real apology. I told them I'd see them at the wedding and walked out. My hands were shaking as I drove away. I pulled over after a few miles and sat in a parking lot, trying to calm down. I felt simultaneously powerful and empty, like I'd won something but couldn't figure out what the prize was. The wedding was beautiful. My sister looked radiant. Her soon-to-be husband seemed like a genuinely good guy, warm and attentive. I sat in the back during the ceremony, away from my parents who were in the front row. I saw my mother glance back at me once, but I didn't acknowledge it. At the reception, I congratulated my sister. She hugged me tight and thanked me for coming. She said it meant everything to her. I told her I was happy for her and meant it. I avoided my parents throughout the evening. It wasn't hard. They seemed to be avoiding me too. But near the end of the night, my father approached me at the bar. He stood next to me without saying anything for a moment, then ordered a whiskey. He told me he'd been thinking about what I said, that maybe I was right about some things. He said raising kids was hard, and he'd done the best he could with what he knew. He said he hoped someday I might understand that. I took a drink of my beer and looked at him. Really looked at him. He was old. Tired. There was something defeated in his posture that hadn't been there before. I told him I did understand that raising kids was hard. That parenting was probably the most difficult thing a person could do. But that didn't excuse what he'd done. That plenty of parents struggled and didn't abandon their children at gas stations. That difficulty didn't justify cruelty. He nodded slowly, still not looking at me. He said he supposed that was fair. Then he asked if there was any chance, any at all, that we could move forward. Not forget, but maybe find some kind of peace. I thought about it. I thought about the 13-year-old kid behind the dumpster, cold and scared and certain he'd been thrown away. I thought about all the years of therapy, the relationships I'd sabotaged because I couldn't trust anyone fully, the hypervigilance that still kicked in whenever I felt vulnerable. I told him no, that there wasn't a path forward for us, that what they'd done had permanently severed something that couldn't be repaired, but that I didn't hate them anymore, which was something, that I'd moved from hatred to indifference, and that was the best I could offer. He drank his whiskey in one swallow and set the glass down. He said he understood. Then he walked away, back to where my mother was sitting. She looked at him questioningly, and he shook his head. She started crying again. I left the reception shortly after. I said goodbye to my sister, wished her well, and drove back to my hotel. The next morning, I flew home. I haven't heard from my parents since. My sister sends occasional updates, carefully edited to avoid mentioning them unless necessary. Her wedding photos arrived in the mail a few weeks later. There was one of the whole family, including me, standing awkwardly to the side. We all looked like strangers who happened to be in the same room. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have tried harder to forgive, to build some kind of bridge. But then I remember that night, the smell of garbage and diesel, the sound of rats in the dark. I remember calling for help and being told to man up. I remember being 13 years old and learning that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had conditions after all. And I remember that I survived. Not because of them, but in spite of them. That I built a life worth living, found people worth trusting, became someone I could be proud of. That their abandonment didn't break me permanently, even though they'd clearly intended it as some twisted form of education. I keep the wedding invitation in my desk drawer, not as a memento, but as a reminder that I have the power to decide who gets access to my life. That I don't owe anyone forgiveness just because they're family. That manning up sometimes means walking away from people who hurt you and never looking back. The note from my mother is there too. Those 2 words, please come. I came. I said what I needed to say, and then I left on my own terms, in my own car, with no intention of being abandoned ever again. That's enough revenge for me. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind. The kind where you survive and build something good and refuse to let the people who hurt you have any more of your life than they already took. Where you show up, remind them of exactly what they did, and walk away knowing they have to live with it forever while you move on. I still don't sleep well sometimes, but I don't sleep behind dumpsters anymore either. And that, I've learned, is its own kind of victory.